Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Omaha Police Department, I want to thank the citizens of Omaha and the law enforcement community, locally and nationally, for the overwhelming support they have shown us. It is humbling, and it makes all of us proud to serve our great city. Mayor Stothert and I continue our constant communication on the incident that occurred yesterday. Mayor Stothert's going to make early arrangements to come home. She's at her son's wedding in Florida. She's going to come home early to attend the funeral. Today's press conference will be a clinical law enforcement briefing on the events that occurred yesterday. It is designed for transparency, just like we would do in the aftermath of any other large-scale occurrence that occurs in the city of Omaha. So please bear with me. There are quite a few details that I will go through. We have prepared a media packet, and at the end of my briefing, I will take some questions. On Monday, May 20th at 12:58 p.m., Omaha police officers assigned to the Metro Area Task Force were conducting surveillance in the area of Martin Avenue and Reed Street. Sergeant Jeff Kopetz, a 24-year police veteran, and Officer Robert Laney, a 25-year police veteran, were attempting to locate and arrest 26-year-old Marcus D. Wheeler. Wheeler was wanted on a felony warrant for first-degree assault as a result of a shooting that occurred on September 5th, 2014. You should have copies of this in your media packet. While Sergeant Kopetz and Officer Laney were watching the residence at 3057 Martin Avenue, additional officers assigned to the multi-agency task force began responding to their location to assist with locating Wheeler. Among the responding officers were Officer Jeff Shada, a 21-year police veteran, and Officer Kerry Orozco, a 7-year police veteran. Officer Laney observed the suspect, which matched the description of Wheeler on foot near the intersection of Vane Street and Martin Avenue. Officer Laney drove to the intersection of Vane Street and Martin Avenue, where he observed Wheeler walking in a grassy area on the north side of Vane Street, across from the address of 3159 Vane Street. Officer Laney radioed to Sergeant Kopetz that he had the suspect. Officer Laney parked his unmarked vehicle, equipped with emergency police lights, in front of 3159 Vane Street. The red and blue emergency police lights were flashing at this time. Officer Laney got out of his vehicle and called Wheeler by his name and told him to stop. Wheeler responded by pulling a handgun and firing at least 3 gunshots at Officer Laney. One bullet struck the lower portion of the driver's side door of Laney's vehicle. It's depicted in the photo. Officer Laney did not have a chance to discharge his handgun in response. A second bullet struck the back window of a parked vehicle in the driveway at 3159 Vane Street. A female witness was standing near this vehicle and witnessed and corroborated the confrontation between Wheeler and Officer Laney. Wheeler then fled north towards the rear of 3057 Martin Avenue. At this point, Officer Laney radioed to Sergeant Kopetz that shots were fired and that Wheeler had fled towards 3057 Martin Avenue. Sergeant Kopetz quickly drove his unmarked vehicle into the driveway of 3057 Martin Avenue and turned on his red and blue emergency lights. The sergeant got out of his vehicle and observed Erica L. Coppage Williams and a small child come out of the front door of the residence. Sergeant Kopetz yelled up to Coppage Williams to come out away from the residence to him. So he's motioning her, come to us. Sergeant Kopetz described Coppage Williams' appearance as agitated and stressed as she yelled back at him. Sergeant Kopetz then observed Wheeler appear from the back of 3057 Martin Avenue, walking across the driveway from the west towards the east. There's a green four-door sedan parked in the driveway that was between Wheeler and Sergeant Kopetz. Sergeant Kopetz gave Wheeler loud verbal commands to stop and get on the ground. Wheeler instantly responded to the verbal commands by quickly turning towards Sergeant Kopetz, taking a crouched shooting position, pointing a handgun and firing multiple gunshots at Sergeant Kopetz. Sergeant Kopetz at this time returned gunfire towards Wheeler. At this moment, Officer Orozco and Officer Shada ran up to the driveway and formed a tactical approach behind Sergeant Kopetz's position. Wheeler continued east over a fence and into the backyard of 3055 Martin Avenue. The sergeant, followed by Officer Orozco and Officer Shada, approached the backyard along the west side of 3055 Martin Avenue. Sergeant Kopetz observed Wheeler in the backyard. Wheeler was again crouched down in a shooting stance and fired a second volley of multiple gunshots at Sergeant Kopetz. Sergeant Kopetz also fired multiple gunshots at Wheeler in return. Immediately after this exchange of gunfire, Officer Orozco yelled out that she had been hit. Sergeant Kopetz turns towards her, observed her bleeding, and yelled for her to get on the ground. Sergeant Kopetz then lost sight of Wheeler as he fled towards the east. During the exchange of gunfire, Wheeler fired at least 6 gunshots from a 9mm caliber handgun, equipped with a high-capacity drum-type magazine, should be depicted in one of the photos. This exchange of gunfire was witnessed by a citizen. Officers Shada and Orozco did not discharge their duty weapons. Their duty weapons were .45 caliber. Officer Orozco suffered a lethal gunshot wound to her upper chest area, just above the front panel ballistic vest line. Officer Shada pulled Officer Orozco to the front yard of 3055 Martin, where Officer Shada began to administer first aid. 2 uniformed patrol officers arrived on scene and began CPR on Officer Orozco until the Omaha Fire Department arrived and took over the emergency medical procedures. Wheeler was struck by 2 gunshots. One was a lethal gunshot wound to his chest. However, he was able to continue eastbound through the backyards along Martin Avenue to the rear of 3043 Reed Street. A witness observed Wheeler collapse in the yard on the southeast corner of the residence at this address. The witness also observed a handgun fall to the ground with Wheeler. Witnesses alerted officers to Wheeler's location. Sergeant Kopetz, Officer Laney, and other officers that had arrived at the scene located Wheeler lying located Wheeler lying on the ground at the rear of 3043 Reed Street. Lying next to Wheeler was the 9mm Glock handgun. The uniformed patrol officers began CPR on Wheeler until the fire department could take over. Officer Orozco and Wheeler were transported to CHI Hospital in extremely critical condition, with CPR in progress for both. Officer Orozco was treated by a trauma team at the hospital. Officer Orozco succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. Preliminary autopsy results show that Officer Orozco died from a gunshot wound to the upper chest, just above the ballistic vest line. Further evidence showed that the bullet that struck Officer Orozco passed through her chest and exited her back. A bullet was recovered from inside of her rear ballistic vest panel. This bullet was examined by the Omaha Police Department forensic firearms examiners. The bullet was fired from a 9mm handgun. The only person at this scene that had a 9mm handgun was our suspect Wheeler. Wheeler was also treated by a trauma team at the hospital. He also succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. Preliminary autopsy results have not been completed and are not available at this time. To summarize, the firearms involved in this incident include a 9mm handgun fired a minimum of 9 times by Wheeler, at least 3 gunshots fired at Officer Laney on Vane Street, and at least 6 gunshots fired at the 3 officers in the driveway of 3057 Martin Avenue. Wheeler was armed with a Glock 9mm handgun with a high-capacity drum-type magazine with a 50-round capacity. Wheeler's handgun was loaded with 45 rounds of 9mm ammunition when it was recovered. An additional Glock 9mm magazine with a magazine capacity of 15 rounds was located on the ground in the backyard of 3055 Martin Avenue. This magazine contained 8 rounds of ammunition. Sergeant Kopetz was the only police officer that discharged his duty weapon. Sergeant Kopetz fired between 3 to 4 shots at Wheeler. All 4 officers in this incident were armed with Glock 45 handguns. Law enforcement officers that are assigned to the Metro Area Fugitive Task Force wear a modified tactical police uniform due to the nature of their work. The uniform typically consists of tan pants, a dark shirt, and a black tactical vest, clearly marked with police on front and back. At this point in the investigation, 13 sworn law enforcement personnel and 11 civilian witnesses have been interviewed by the Omaha Police Department's Officer-Involved Investigations team. This investigation continues at this time. Autopsy and toxicology results are pending, and forensic firearms and ballistic examinations will be conducted. Wheeler is a convicted felon. He's also a known gang member. He was convicted for a federal narcotics distribution charge. He was sentenced to 5 years, 6 months in federal prison. According to court documents, he ended his term of federal supervised release on November 5th, 2013. Douglas County Attorney Don Klein has been contacted and briefed on this incident. The sergeant who discharged his weapon is 51-year-old Jeffrey Kopetz. And again, he's a 24-year veteran assigned to the Omaha Police Fugitive Squad. He has been a supervisor in that squad for many, many years. Per Omaha Police Department policy, any officer who discharges his or her firearm that results in injury or death is placed on paid administrative leave, pending the Officer-Involved Investigations team and Internal Affairs investigations. Sergeant Kopetz has been placed on paid administrative leave. Any additional information about this incident will be released by the Omaha Police Department's Press Information Officer by myself directly. A grand jury will be convened to investigate per state law. The actions of my officers were justified as they were attempting to apprehend a dangerous suspect who engaged them in gunfire on at least 2 occasions. I'm going to go ahead and take a few questions as to the incident at hand. Please identify the news organization you're with, state your name, and speak loudly so that any viewers can hear your question as well.
Chief Schmatter, Christine Engel, Channel 7. How often do you see, 50-round capacity, how often do you see something like that with such a high capacity out on Omaha streets?
It's a rare weapon. The drum magazine is not something we see very often. And the drum magazine can go to an offender's mindset, and it certainly shows you the type of weaponry that is out there on occasion, but even this one is rare, even for law enforcement to see.
Chief Schmatter, Jessica Gill, WOWT 6 News. Can you talk a little bit about the time and care that goes into getting such a dangerous person in custody?
Sure. The Metro Area Fugitive Task Force, they do their homework. Once they get a warrant that's signed by a judge, they start their background work trying to identify where that particular suspect may be. And their background work involves all the investigative tactics that a normal investigator would take. And on this particular occasion, they took it upon themselves to even conduct surveillance of the location to see if they could find him. Once they spotted him, they're also trained to take those offenders into custody. And what they will do is they will focus on the worst of the worst that we have in Omaha. Oftentimes, they're given special assignments based on who we feel is the most dangerous person in Omaha with a warrant at the time. I'm not saying Wheeler was. He certainly was extremely dangerous and on our high list. I'm going to go to Tom Becky. You had a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yesterday in the press conference, you would not talk about this because you said the investigation was ongoing.
Right.
Do you consider the investigation to be complete now, or is there still more investigating going on?
Well, there's always more investigating going on because we still have the autopsy results. We still have to do the ballistic testing and do all the legwork on that. But this is as complete as we're going to get after one day. And as I said earlier, we feel it's important to come out to the public, let the public know what happened. We do this after every major occurrence. And it's the way we operate. It's designed for transparency, Tom. And we wanted to ensure that we did this on this shooting as well. In essence, our procedures have not changed. And our protocol hasn't changed because an officer was involved.
Chief Paul Gutierrez, Fox 42 News. You had mentioned that at the scene